Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hayden Raven, and welcome to Photopsia. And I'm really interested to get into it because of the surveys that it introduced when it was on the game page. There's two. There's one you fill out before and after you play the game, and I'm really intrigued by this game because the art style, the framework, it's very uniquely designed, and I haven't seen a game like this for a very long time. So I'm very excited about Photopsia. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me as we journey into whatever this madness and greatness that this game is going to be. Had the girl known what the events that would follow her suspension would lead to, she might have tried never to let things get this far, but deep down she should have known that they would be nothing short of a blessing. Interesting. Perhaps mortality was just not something a 14-year-old teenager would much care for, or maybe it was just the fact that she had been met with various misfortunes along those years. For her, daily life was miserable and mundane. It was a disgusting cocktail of a dull routine and coarseness from her human peers. It had only been a matter of time before the girl's mind became clouded by a thick, dense fog, an apathetic kind of nihilism that made everything feel pointless. It was something that had always been a part of her, but had significantly thickened during the past 2 years. Today, however, she had a reason to be proud of herself. The monotonous routine had been broken, and she wouldn't have to return to her peers anytime soon. Though she couldn't express it properly, and there wasn't anyone to convey it to anyone that really knew her, it'd be apparent that she was giddy as could be. Interesting. And here we begin. As the girl turned the key to her house and opened the front door, the familiar dim and cramped hallway greeted her. No one was home. It's not as if she'd expect anyone to be, but it still was a slight blow to the girl's mood. It was quite typical for no one to be home as usual. The girl's father would be absent, his trips being a week at a time. That's tough. He was a truck driver transporting goods through various European nations. It wasn't something to brag about, but it was enough to support both of them. Both of them, there's only two. In the current situation, his absence could be considered a blessing. There would be no angry yelling, or at least not face to face. The girl hated as the aftermath was never anything pleasant. She would always end up crying in her room, while her father would be drinking, watching TV with a glazed look in his eyes. Whoa. The girl stepped inside, pressing the door behind her shut as she flipped the light switch to the right and wiped her shoes on the doormat and murmured, "I'm home." She crouched to slip off her shoes, pulled open the worn-out, askew shoe rack, and exchanged them for a pair of simple home slippers. Sounds like me. Still bending over, her eyes lingered on her lower legs, investigating the shallow cuts that dotted them. Most already had proper scabs. Streaks of blood had flown down and stained her socks. It wasn't a lot of blood, but the wounds had still bled more than expected. As she stared, she started biting her lips in discomfort. The usual stars had begun to dance in front of her eyes. The girl wasn't used to getting injuries that made her bleed. Hours earlier, the girl had gone into a physical fight at school. The brawl had, unsurprisingly, concluded with her getting knocked out into the bushes growing in the school's courtyard, which ended up having surprisingly sharp thorns. That's really rough, man. Maybe it had been a mistake to attack the classmate that had a beefcake of a boyfriend, but on the emotional level, it seemed to have been satisfying at least. Of course, the Chihuahua-like girl had acted like she was pure innocent victim, and thus she and her older serial repeater bodyguard had gotten off scot-free. Wow. The girl lightly touched her bruised eye. Now and again, it would visibly throb, gradually worsening and then swelling. ... She sighed and carefully placed her backpack on the floor. Its material was firm despite being second-hand, so it luckily hadn't really gotten scratched up during the tumble into the bushes. This is rough. With a dismayed look, she blinked a few times, trying to get the stars to leave her vision. The stars danced endlessly, almost in a taunting manner. She shut her eyes and took a few deep breaths. Doing so for about a minute usually helped her get them out of her sight. She was knocked out. She has a concussion. She has to. That's brain damage, everybody. Naturally, it worked this time as well. As the girl got up, slipping her feet into the slippers, she took a key ring from her coat pocket and locked the front door with the thickest of the keys. Along with her other keys, a small metallic four-leaf clover from the ring, for good luck. The middle of it was engraved with a girl's name. Returning the keyring to its usual pocket, Iris tiredly let the coat slip from her shoulders, hanging it on one of the 4 lonely hooks to her left and the right side of the door. Picking her bag up again, Iris switched off the entry hall lights and advanced into the living room. Very interesting, and I love the ambient music in the background. This is what makes a visual novel. The living room had 3 functions. It was a kitchen, a dining room, and as the name implies, a living room. Though now her father was gone, she wouldn't be using the dining table. The dining table was more of a formality. Iris herself preferred to eat on the couch while watching television. There were 4 other rooms in the house, 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom, and a usual small utility closet with a washing machine, a dryer, and other cleaning tools. Overall, the room was a little cramped, but the girl was at ease with it. She was used to small spaces. It was big open spaces that instilled discomfort in her. Yee. The furniture was overall pretty dull. The house had come with it, as had all the homes which the girl and her father had resided in throughout Iris's life. The only piece of furniture that hadn't come to the house was a small freezer, for her father always seemed worried about running out of food. It was stocked up with cheap frozen pizzas, cheap ice cream, and meat. They never took any other furniture. Everything always was a mediocre quality and did its job as adequately as it possibly could. Years ago, in another town, the girl hadn't noticed how much comfortable her friend's house was. It had been quite a shock, especially when the friend had insisted that it wasn't that great. Sometimes the girl pondered whether she and her father would have nice furniture if her mom had been alive, and that is the string I've been waiting for. Typically, the 2 of them would have left this place a year ago, but yet they remained. They too had rarely ever stayed somewhere for longer than a year, and unfortunately for Iris, the place they stayed at longer just had to be this one. Oh my. Lost in thoughts, Iris absent-mindedly entered her own bedroom and dropped her backpack next to her dresser. The room was impersonal, save the things for the top of her dresser and star-themed bedsheets which she had gotten for her birthday a few years ago. That's wonderful. There were books, small gemstones, and a glass of water on top of the dresser. The books were mainly ones from Iris needed for school. However, there was a scrapbook and a library book about ghost sightings among them as well. Nothing intrigued the girl like a good ghost story. Wonderful. Iris tried to be skeptical, shout that described sightings, but after seeing some of the photos and reading some passages from the book, she couldn't help but feel somewhat paranoid whenever she remembered them. Paranoid indeed. She really wanted to keep it, but the book would need to be returned next week. Oh darn. Library books. Generally, the girl liked pretty and unusual things, and thus over time, she'd collected gems, named a tiger's eye, a blue sunstone, and an amethyst. But those were her primary focus around the time she first discovered gemstones. Afterwards, she had taken a liking to iridescent gems such as labradorite, opal, and fluorite. Even if spending money on them meant she couldn't buy other things, Iris would rather spend her money on the colorful stones than a new second-hand clothing. Even it got her into troubles with her peers. You see, that's very interesting because, especially in this age, people are very focused on what they wear instead of things like that. I feel like that's very unique and interesting. It's very characteristic and it's wonderful. I love that. I love the character design they've given Iris so far. Wonderful job. On top of that, at this point in time, the hatred between her and her classmates was unfixable. Even if she somehow would begin wearing the newest of the new, it's not as if it would magically fix her social life. Before she had started collecting gemstones, Iris had also been collecting pretty-looking pebbles. Whenever she saw one in someone's garden, she would take it. No one would miss them, and she found a waste of time to have such a pretty stone left unacknowledged. That's hilarious. To this very day, Iris still carried the prettiest of pebbles in her backpack at all times, to look at them more closely during school breaks whenever she felt down. Taking pebbles to school was a lot less risky than taking any of her gemstones with her. After all, no one would go out of their way to steal a pebble, she hoped. The girl crouched down next to her bag, took out her phone and her charger, and plugged the charger into the socket next to her bed once she had connected the phone. It wasn't very low on batteries, but she preferred to keep it fully charged as it was less likely to unexpectedly shut down that way, as even with the new battery, it was a bit unstable. The phone's design was a rip-off of one of the popular brands. It was 4 generations old, and it was a second-hand one as well. To her father's anger, it had become... To her father's anger, it had come with a crack in the screen and hadn't been in the image of the seller. Oh, so he got ripped off. This phone had been the girl's birthday present this year, and even though the quality wasn't as high as those of her classmate, and it wasn't good enough to play games bigger than 2 megabytes on, it had overjoyed her to finally get a phone that she could use to surf the net and watch online videos with. It was only natural for her to have her phone on her, with her father being out so much. Her previous one had been a very old NKYA model. Okay then. She had had it since she was about 6 years old, so it was quite the upgrade. Indeed. Oh my, stars? Iris plopped down onto her bed of stars as she did, and she saw the dancing lights again. She sighed, but stared at them for a while. The fight had tired her, even though it hadn't lasted longer than a few minutes. It wasn't more than she could handle. Due to the stars that would pop up whenever she exercised or got dizzy, her father had told her that she wasn't allowed to do sports. Oh, that's sad. At school, she was only allowed to participate in the warm-ups during PE class. Though he had arranged to protect her, it backfired. It was just another excuse for her classmates to single her out and bully her. Iris frowned and swatted at one of the stars before closing her eyes again. It's almost as if she had felt something when hitting it, but her father had told her not to focus on them too much. It could permanently damage her eyes. The girl was skeptical and believed that actually it was how it worked, but did as she was told anyway, just in case. Very, very interesting. Iris sat up slowly and opened her eyes again, while simultaneously taking out her nightgown from under her pillow. The lights had once again disappeared. As Iris took out the pair of clean undergarments, she headed towards the bathroom. Even though the routine had been drastically disrupted, it seemed that it didn't change the girl's daily course of action at all that much. Interesting. Hello? After having showered, Iris bandaged up the cuts on her leg, put on her nightgown, and threw the clothes she had worn into the washing machine. Usually she would shower right before going to bed and wash her clothes in the weekend, but she had bled a bit onto them and disliked feeling filthy. I agree. The girl's sweater was her only warm piece of clothing, and her skirt was only one that still fit her. Her father didn't have any money, nor the time to go get more clothing. Wow. You see, this is making me feel. This is why I chose this game, is because I saw passion in it. Oh my, this is just... You see, I can't help but feel as though the developer themselves maybe put a bit of themselves into this, and is why this is so real. It's just... It's very fresh. It's very mind-boggling. He always insisted on joining her to select clothing that didn't stand out too much, but his taste was so old-fashioned that Iris, despite his efforts, ended up sticking out like a sore thumb. Whenever she would confront him with it, he would get angry and start yelling at her, and thus the girl never brought it up again. Clothes shopping was always something that was procrastinated. It was not as if her father had promised her to do it. She had no reason to expect him to ever come along. As the washing machine filled up with water, the girl left the utility closet. She hadn't eaten anything since lunchtime, evidenced by her stomach's occasional audible rumbles. I love that. Oh my goodness, the wording of this is quite unique. It's quite wonderful. It's just melodic in how it's written, and I really like that. I really, really like this. The kitchen didn't have a proper counter. It had been replaced with a small freezer. Oh, I see it now. Thus, the girl and her father would just use the dinner table to prepare food. Tonight's dinner would most likely be pasta, ricotta, cabbage, and steak. The girl's cooking skills were above average for her age, as to be expected for someone who was home alone so often. Her pepper to salt ratio seemed to be close to perfection, and she had great fondness for garlic. Every steak she prepared she made with garlic. She even smeared garlic butter on top of it. Not only that, any sandwich that wasn't sweet would have the same buttery spread. She'd also smear it on steaming hot pizzas, right as they were fresh out of the oven. Her cooking was limited by what her father could afford, but once in a while we would buy spices for Iris to experiment with. This time it was rosemary, the dew of the sea. Wow. She's smiling. As the girl cut up the clove of garlic into pieces, she wore a satisfied smile. The soft sound of the knife tapping against the cutting board was mild and pleasant. Even once the clove was divided into dozens of small pieces, Iris kept cutting it into smaller pieces. You see, as I'm reading this, I can hear the garlic being sliced up despite not having any audio. It's just that same ambient tone in the background. It's just the way that they're structuring these stories. It's making it very real, at least for me. I'm really enjoying this. Cutting up things was Iris's favorite part of cooking. That and creating sauces, as to her, it was like making a magic potion. After a while, the pasta was boiling and the juicy steak was sizzling in garlic-filled olive oil. And eventually the meal was on her plate, with the predictable addition of ricotta as the girl sat on the couch watching the news, watching the usual reporter. When her father was home, they'd usually joke about the awfully coordinated and expensive clothing everyone was wearing. A food scandal, recent reports from the health inspection state that significant quantities of horse meat have been found in several meat products sold at fast food chains and supermarkets, from the reporter. This meat originates from the foreign company. When reaching out to the supplier of the meat about the matter, they had no comment. Iris rolled her eyes. Figures. Why are they even expecting them to respond? Of course they wouldn't. This was a scandal quite some years ago. I'm going to say no more about it. The girl stared at her own steak, squinting a bit. Was it horse meat? She examined it a bit longer before sticking a piece into her mouth. When reaching out to supermarkets and fast food chains that did business with a horse meat supplier, all of them stated that they would cut ties with the company. In other news, missing persons are on the rise. The majority of reported cases, people are last seen traveling by train. Rumors of a train serial killer are on the rise. However, the police were quick to dismiss the rumors. The female reporter on the screen was briefly replaced by a detective. Let me do a detective voice. We don't want to rush any conclusions. There's not enough evidence to conclude that there is a serial killer involved. The common denominator of these people is that they loners with a history of depression. Wow. Are you really? Just wow. There is no proof that any of them have been abducted or even followed around. For that matter, our officers are working hard to locate their potential victims, but so far, we don't have any solid leads. In other words, please do not lose hope if one of your loved ones is missing. Now on to the weather after our break. Iris groaned. The commercials were always 7 to 8 minutes on this channel. They would often repeat the same garbage commercials over and over again. This program was brought to you by Minty Fresh Toothpaste. 2 treatments with Minties a day will keep the cavities away. I believe that's a lie. Are you tired of having bowel troubles? Fund our research on synthetic organs. Fund now and receive special privileges once our research is finalized. Wow, sounds like a Patreon account. Iris zapped away. Her father didn't really care about watching commercials, but she didn't want to waste her time with them. Eventually, she found a channel with a cooking competition that looked interesting. She probably would never really get the means to make that same recipe herself, but that didn't diminish the joy of watching them. The contestants had to make apple pies of their preference. 2 people would be kicked out at the end of the episode. Dun dun dun. The girl eagerly stared at the creation of apple pies, from her national typical crumble apple pies to lattice pies to apple galettes, and I'm probably mispronouncing all of these. You cooking channel fanatics, please fix my grammar. It all looked mouth-watering. As the girl passively finished her food, she left the TV on in the background. Iris hastily collected everything dirty and put it into the sink. She spread out dishcloth and freezer and began washing the dishes. Of course, she wanted to see what was going on in the cooking program, but she wanted to be in bed more than anything. Sleep was already in her eyes. She had trouble keeping them open naturally due to the bruise as well. There's the sound effects. The TV was hard to hear with the background noise of the sink, and all of the dishes as the girl cleaned them out in the bubbly water. Once she finished cleaning the knives, she washed a bit more absent-mindedly. Her eyes closed a few seconds, with her hands kept working. Gradually, she spaced out more and more, making that process a lot slower. Once she was done, the cooking show was already finished, and the commercials had started playing. Here's our stars again. Iris sighed and carefully dried off the knives, returning them to their respective locations and then spaced out again, and she repeatedly rubbed dry spots off the other dishes with her towel. Once again, she saw stars, but she was too drowsy to care. Even though washing machine cycles were finished once she was done in the kitchen, she made haste to the laundry room. Without bothering to turn on the lights in the room, she robotically set up the appropriate setting for her clothes, took them out of the washing machine, shut it down, threw the clothes into the dryer, and started it up. On a typical day, Iris would always drink a cup of tea before bed, but today she wouldn't get to drink her tea before falling asleep. So Iris just turned off the television and the living room lights as she left her own room. She tiredly walked to the bed and plopped into it. Once the girl had properly gotten herself under the blankets, she immediately drifted off. I wonder what her dreams are like. The pleasant scent of a bergamot was the very first thing I noticed upon waking up. It's in first person, I was sat at a small yet elegant table, a teapot, 2 teacups, and a refined cake stand. Without really thinking about it, I took the cup of tea into my hand. It felt light and was unfilled. Frowning, I looked down at it. As I did, the cup gained weight and filled up with hot tea. Magic. I was a bit surprised, but luckily I didn't drop it. My eyes fell on the chair that came across of mine. It was empty, yet the teacup on the other side contained steaming hot tea. Was I waiting for someone? Was this some kind of meeting? It had to be. I fixed my posture, straightened my back. Who was I meeting? I couldn't remember, but for some reason I was sure someone would come around and tell me something important. But I knew that there was no way that would happen now, for this was only the first version of the demo. Are you serious? Oh my. If you're still reading this, thank you so much for sticking around. A lot of things still have been added to the parts you've just read, from extra cut into music for this part, some sound effects, and a better looking UI, which I couldn't properly adjust with my lack of RenPy knowledge. Despite this fact, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed it. If you've had time and interest, I would highly appreciate it if you filled out my survey. That's right, my survey. Anyway, I do hope that you see you back again. Thanks once again for playing. Wow. Let me just say a few things before we leave. This is wonderful. I really want to see this in full development, and when it is, I'm going to play it. I didn't realize this was just a demo, but this is wonderful. Oh my goodness, I haven't played a game like this in a very long time. It's more than just text-based. This is a visual novel, and it perhaps is the first visual novel that I've had on my channel since the beginning of my channel, and I'm very glad for that. I'm glad that I'm able to have a very first visual novel such as this quality. This is amazing. This is wonderful. Oh my goodness. I'm so happy I played this, and I'm so happy that you joined me on this game. If you would like to play this for yourself, the game link will be in the description down below, and I urge you to answer the surveys before and after the game. I'm going to go answer the survey right now, and we're going to see what waits us when the game is fully developed, and when that happens, I'm going to play it all the way through. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time, but join me next time, because I guarantee you we'll have a fun adventure and an interesting time. So ladies and gentlemen, for now I must bid you a good evening and a good night. I'll see you